we do thank you for the ability to laugh and for things to laugh at, and especially ourselves to laugh at. Now, in this morning service, we just want you to pull aside one of the veils and show us something greater, bigger, and share with us yourself, your mind, your thoughts, your nature. Make us bigger, stronger in every way. And this we give you thanks for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. One of the reasons why people over all ages have been able to find help in the Gospels is that the Gospels, as I'll say over and over, probably until I die, is that while they were the events in the life of one man, they were also chosen experiences so that by the time he got through life, he would have experienced all in life that everybody else could possibly experience and overcame them or wasn't broken down by any of the experiences that we have to. That's why he's called Lord and Master and Savior and all of these other words, because he faced up to all the possibilities of things that life could throw at anybody, but he didn't break under them. Somehow or other, he conquered them all, and it wouldn't have done any good if it really would have been a tragedy, actually, if at the end he had been just whipped up into the sky in a cloud without having faced death. For that is one of the big mysteries of life and one of the big fears of life that everybody's had to wonder about and fear ever since we have any record of history at all. So he had to face death also, for it wouldn't have done any good to you or me if he had faced everything else but death. So he went through death, and it wouldn't have done any good either if he had merely died. Died just like everybody else did, but he had to come back and say, now look and see. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones. I'm still a person. Death doesn't end it all at all. So all of these things, that's why people, in whatever problems they have to face periodically, they'll flip through page after page and they find something and they say, well, this helps me. Because in some way or other he had to face up to it. And so that by studying his life, you find then how to overcome the problems of life, whatever they are. And it isn't so much in studying also what he said as it is in studying what he did. For every so often, all of us, our voices, our ideals, our visions and dreams reach beyond what we really are. And anybody can make up a good talk. But what people are looking for and what they'll travel the whole world over is to find somebody who is the incarnation of what he's talking about. Albert Schweitzer. This is one of the great laws of life. One of the great laws of life is commitment. Not understanding, not wisdom, not any of those things that we commonly look after. Albert Schweitzer had I don't know how many doctor's degrees, and he had about all that in a cultured society anybody could want. And he traveled over Europe, and he was well thought of in many, many ways. But people didn't come from the ends of the earth to see Albert Schweitzer when he was the great brain, when he was the great man of talent in about 4 or 5 areas. But the time came when Albert Schweitzer committed himself, committed his life, and said, this one thing I will do. They say that there is that in commitment there is self-denial also, that all of the great men of the world, that great and lesser also, all of the knowns and all of the unknowns who have achieved anything of lasting value in this world, they could probably have done many, many, many things. Their talents are broad. And as long as they frittered them away on everything, they never amounted to very much. But one day they said, well, I'm going to deny all the possibilities that I might do, and I'm going to commit myself to one thing, And this one thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it and dream it and eat it and sleep it and be it. And I'm going to become the incarnation of what I'm talking about. Now, Albert Schweitzer, it's easy for us to stand here now and to say, well, sure, but look at this. He's got a hospital there, and articles are being written on him in papers all over the world. And he's famous now, but what about when he left home? People said he was crazy. People said this was a sin. There were all kinds of reasons and all kinds of arguments why a man with his talent, a man with his brains, a man with his love, a man with everything that he had, who could go into the courts of kings and into university halls and everything else. They said, this is a waste of God's talent that you're doing here now. And as far as anybody could ever see then, he was wasting himself. He was burying himself. He would never be heard of again. It's only now that we're able to look back on it. And that's why oftentimes when it comes to this matter of guidance, you've got to follow the heart in doing the thing that's right in front of your nose. And like Henry Drummond said, it probably will not be until years later when you're able to look back on the decisions which have been made that you will realize that you have been guided at all. If an individual is just going to wait and sit down until some angel or something else happens to them and said, this is it, why, you'll just sit down and you'll wait. It just doesn't work that way. It's a devotional life. Somebody has said that if you reduce the spiritual life to its simplest terms, it is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind and do what comes naturally. And I think that's right. For, he says, if you'll ask me, my Father and I will come into you and will live in you. Well, if he comes into us and lives in us and he becomes... Well, if this body is some kind of a mechanism, so that he lives within us like the great organist, giving us the, calling forth the desires and attractions and repulsions and the willpower and the thoughts and the dreams and the imaginations, all the possibilities within us like some gigantic organ, and if he's playing this life of ours, then you've got to begin to believe and trust the feelings and the desires and the attractions and the revulsions and the great faiths and the fears or the tuggings to the left and the right as you would never possibly do it on your own ever. Then this takes faith. For you say, well, how do I know this is God? Well, all that I know is that if you commit yourself to him completely, you've got to take this step of faith, and it is a step into the dark. That is, as far as you are concerned, it is a step into the dark, for you can't see one moment ahead of you. And you don't have to sit around for guidance for every single thing in your life. You were given brains, and you don't have to read the Bible in order to see whether it is safe to cross from one side of the street over to the other. You just got to look. Just look is all. But this much I know, if even in a common thing of that sort, if you're going to step out into the street, and if you have used your mind and your eyesight as much as we normally do, and if something unusual is going to happen, and if you're trusting him, you'll get a feeling on the inside, an intuitive hunch or whatever, instinct or whatever you want to call it, that may not make sense up in your conscious mind here, but there'll be a hesitation. Obey those feelings. That much I know. For I was an intellectual snob, and I worshiped my brains and I worshiped books and all that stuff. And I know that when I first started in trying to go all the way with God, that one of the things that used to confuse me every so often, whatever the facts were, I would look at them and I would analyze them and I said, well, this is the thing to do. And yet there would be some sort of an uneasy feeling on the inside of me, and I said, well, this is silly. The facts are this, and that. I'm going to just plain do it. Well, whenever that feeling was there, that I shouldn't do it, even no matter what my mind said. If I went ahead and followed my conscious mind, it always turned out wrong. Now, I don't have those feelings all the time. I'm sure that when the facts which I have are adequate for the situation, and I'm doing the best that I know how, if this is right, well, you're going to just go ahead and do the job that is at hand in the best way that you know how. Somebody asked Rufus Mosley once about something where you couldn't say that you should do this or the other thing, and he said, when you're confused about what you ought to do, when you don't feel to get any pulling or tugging one way or the other, he said, just think of the most loving and kind thing that could possibly be done in this situation and just do it and forget about it then. But when you will need some sort of special help, why, you will get it in that way. Albert Cliff, once I was sharing a meeting with him in Vancouver, and you can have I don't quite know how to say it, but there are these powers of faith in us, and there's the power of the psychic and the power of seeing into the unseen, and those things are real. But as we said the other day, you could have the power to heal, and you could have the power to know all of the occult mysteries and the psychic and I don't know what all. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're spiritual at all. You can physically, mentally, by sheer determination of your will, develop yourself in that way. But Albert Cliff had those things, but he was a Christian through and through. He had bowed the knee of his life to God, and God was sitting on the throne of his life. And I have often seen him in a meeting there. He always liked to have a picture of Jesus behind him, and every so often he would turn around and he would say, "That's the man that I work for." But Albert had this thing developed to either a gift or developed to a degree that I have seldom seen in anybody in this world. He had it from the time that he was a baby, and he wasn't any mystic, psychic monk. He was a scientist most of his life and a hard-headed man. But once I was in this meeting in Vancouver with them, and they were singing before the meeting, and all of a sudden Albert stood up and he looked around the audience and worked his way back, and he came back to the seat, and he said, "Elliot, if you ever get a feeling, a hunch, an urge, a desire in your heart to do something, and you're trusting God, do it before you think about it. For," he said, "no matter what it is, you can always rationalize yourself out of it. You can always argue, and you can bring up facts on this side and facts on the other side." And he said, "I was in my seat here, and I had the desire. There was something came into my mind, or my desires, or whatever it is, that there was a Salvation Army man in this meeting, and that he needed a $10 bill." And he said, I immediately stood up, and he said, "I didn't have any idea if there was any Salvation Army man in this meeting, but I got up and I looked around, and he said, way back there was one." And he said, "I went back there and I gave it to him." He said, "Why in the world that man needs $10, I haven't got the faintest idea." He said, "And it's none of my business either." But in private conversations with him, time after time, he would say, "When these things come, act on them. Act on them. Don't rest." He says it's like developing a muscle in your arm. If you'll just exercise it, it'll get stronger and stronger and stronger, and you'll know what to do so often when ordinarily you did not. So this all gets back to which I started out to say, and which I haven't even started on yet, is this, in looking at what Jesus did is the thing. And looking at what he did, you get the incarnation of what he is, and oftentimes his actions speak louder than his words do, whether it's an Albert Schweitzer or a Jesus or whoever it is. And you remember when he was faced with the impossible problem of the feeding of the 5,000. The thing is, what did he do there? It isn't so much what he said. For what he does is kind of a window into a man's soul. It's kind of a window into the motives, into the springs of his life. You say, well, this is what makes him tick. This is what drives him on. These are the standards. These are the basis from which he operates. And in the feeding of the 5,000, as you remember, all these people are out there, and they're in a lonely place. And this is recorded in a few places, but I'm not going into all of the story. But he is given these 5 loaves and 2 fish. And as anybody could see, why 5 loaves and 2 fish are just completely inadequate to feed 5,000 people. It just doesn't work that way. But here they are faced he is faced with an impossible situation. And not what does he say, but what does he do? And here's the thing, what does he do? Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. In other words, he didn't run from a problem. And oftentimes I myself have. But religion to me has never been an escape from reality. It has always forced me to match up to myself and to match up to everybody else. And whatever the problem was, not to run from it, it has forced me to face myself. And it says, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd. So here is the order. Take the little bit that you have, however inadequate it may seem. Take the little bit that you have, and what do you do with it? And Jesus looked up into heaven. Most of us look at the loaves and the fishes and we say, my goodness, this will never work. Just absolutely impossible. 5 loaves and 2 fishes, I'm going to leave here. I'm going to run from this thing. This is a totally impossible situation, and we talk ourselves into the idea that it just can't happen. You keep your eye on the problem. Jesus, the first thing he did was he raised his eyes to heaven. And what is heaven? Heaven is that condition or place where God is worshipped, adored, loved, where he manifests, reigns, wills in every way. It's the manifestation of God's nature, God's spirit, God's abundance. It's a place of perfection. It's all of your dreams come true. That's what heaven is. And heaven is heaven because it is the manifestation or the expression of the nature of God in the affairs of men and women, whether on this side or on the other side. So immediately he instead of looking at the problem, he lifts his eyes up to heaven, up to God, the source of all life. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Lose yourself in the power. Lose yourself in the majesty of God. And God created in abundance, and there was no death, and man walked with God in the Garden of Eden and depended upon God for everything that he had. And because man and God were one, and they walked together and depended together and loved together and shared together in thought and dream and nature and vision and desire and everything else, man automatically had everything, and that's why the Garden of Eden was the Garden of Eden. It was actually heaven then. And in that place there was no drought, there was no death, there was just superabundance of all things, because God is abundant in all ways. This doesn't only mean abundant in money and grapes and material things, but believe me, it includes that also. but it means abundance of friends, abundance of appreciation, abundance of beauty, abundance of peace, just more of all these things than anybody can possibly contain. So that's where he lifted his sights to the place of fulfillment. It's like what the old hymn says. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will go strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. You better turn yourself away. And do you remember when Jeremiah, he was faced with a problem, and it just didn't seem that there was any way out of it. So he turns, whether it was Jesus or Moses or Jeremiah or David or Abraham, when they were faced, what is the first thing they do? They said, "Oh God." That's the same thing as raising your eyes to heaven. Go to the one who has enough to take care of whatever the situation is, for God is not the God of the possible, but of the impossible. And Jeremiah was in that state. And as he goes through the prayer where he's reaching out for help to the source where all prayers are answered, he says, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth by thy great power and stretched out arm, and there is nothing too hard for thee. And then after he's all through with this prayer, God answers him, and he says, "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me?" And every so often, you know, we just talk ourselves into this frame of mind that there are some things that are too hard for God. We say, well, can God cure this? I think there are phrases in the Gospels that I'm glad that they're there. And it says, this man was a cripple for 38 years. This man was blind from birth. Or it'll say, and he was a leper. And so often with us, we feel that if a thing has gone on for just a few years, well, not even God can touch it. And so you look at those little phrases every so often, or the woman that had the issue of blood. I don't know, she had gone to doctor after doctor after doctor, and she had spent her goods. I think it says I'm not sure, but I believe it says over a period of 12 years. Well, with us, if a thing goes on for just a short time, we say, oh, well, not even God can help here. This thing is settled. The bones are just as they are, and I'm just sunk. And they say, and he was a leper, and that was the incurable thing of his day. Still, it's a horrible thing. But aren't you glad that there are instances in the gospel where it shows that whether it was leprosy or an ingrown toenail, to God, it just about meant the same thing. Didn't mean any difference, whether it was leprosy or anything else. Go to the source of all life. It does no good to dwell on the problem at the beginning, whatever the problem is. For if you keep your eyes, if you keep your intentions, if you keep your desires long enough on a problem of any sort, you're going to become a problem yourself. You become the problem. If you keep your eyes, if you keep your desires on a burden long enough, you yourself become the incarnation of that burden. There are all kinds of stories which could be on that. But there was a woman in San Francisco whom I once met, and she had been unappreciated by her papa, by her mama, by everything else, and she had spent her money to provide a home for the father and the mother, and the rest of the brothers and sisters did not appreciate her at all. And after they died, they, in some way or other, they took the house away from her, and so all she could think of for goodness knows how many years, I'm not sure how many years, was the resentment, the hurt, the unappreciation of all that has happened. And so when she saw me, that's all she could think of, and I thought that it would be a wonderful idea if I could just let her, well, just pour this thing out. Just pour the whole thing out and get it out of your system once and for all. Yes, ma'am. Once and for all, just get the whole thing out of your system. And so she talked, and my goodness, I have no idea how long she talked for. But she went over this thing, and I would think, well, now she's through. And said, oh, I forgot to tell you about this. And so this would have gone, and I think, well, my goodness, she's bound to be through now. Oh, she said, but there's something else now. This went on, it was for way over an hour. And boy, you talk about talk. She was an expert at it. But I thought, well, this is good, just let it all come out. Well, after at least an hour and a half of bickering back and forth, I said, well, how you got this way is literally beside the point. And here is the thing about so much where we kid ourselves about our analysis. How you got that way is literally, really is somewhat beside the point. The fact is that you are as you are. Whether you were dropped on your head when you were a baby, or if you were unloved as a child, or if there was an ape way back in your back, how you got that way doesn't matter really. The fact of the matter is, here you are, and what are you going to do about it now? Now is the accepted time. For anybody, no matter what their problem is, now is the time. In fact, now is the only time that you've got. The past is gone. There isn't one thing you can do about it. The future is not here. And all you've got is this little moment right this minute, which in a sense determines what the next moment will be. I forget who the author was that said, what you are going to be, you are now becoming. Now, boy, that's a pretty wonderful thing to think of, and it can frighten you also. For he said, well, I am the prisoner of my subconscious and all this stuff, and I don't know whatever that is. But your subconscious of tomorrow is what you feed your conscious mind today. What you're going to be, you are now becoming. So you better be careful as to the kind of thoughts which go into your mind. So this came up here, and we would start and I would start to talk to her on this way, and say, oh, but there's just one more thing that I forgot to tell you. And this went on for about 3 or 4 times more, and I just then told her in 4-letter words that anybody could understand. I said, I don't care how you got this way. And I'm not in the least bit interested in who hurt you actually in the past. All I want to know is, do you want to remain as you are, or do you want to change right now? And I said, I don't care what anybody said to you or hurt you, snubbed you in the past or anything else. Now is the time. This is all the time that you've got, is right this moment. What are you going to do about it right now? Well, she sat up after that, and we began to make some progress. I think that every so often you've got people oftentimes use an analysis of some sort just as an excuse to go on just as they are and say, I've got a right to be resentful, and I've got a right to pout, and I've got a right to be a stinker, or whatever else it is. They use these analysis, I am as I am because of this, therefore I've got a right to be the so-and-so that I am. And that is not right. It isn't right. Better to do away with all these complicated analysis, which every so often gets to be like a kitten playing with a ball of string or with a ball of yarn, and it gets the thing wrapped up in itself so much that it's just completely bound, imprisoned. I remember a friend of mine that went to a psychoanalyst for about 2 years, and it just got to the point where I've just never seen anything like it. You couldn't say anything to him, or he couldn't say anything, but he would say, now, why did you say that? What was something hidden behind those words? And I said, all I asked for was a drink of water. And that's just about what it is like. I mean, after a bit, you become so introspective that, well, you are nuts. And if you weren't nuts before, you are now. I'm sure that it all has a point, but my goodness, it just seems that over so many years that so many people that I have had to work with, they've gone through all that, and instead of it releasing them, it has imprisoned them more. So when you take your problem, whatever it is, and expose it to heaven, you know you can go into hospitals, and they've got these lights that shine. They are some kind of antiseptic lights. That in this light that some kind of bugs or germs simply cannot live. And just by exposing the cribs and the walls and the blankets and everything else to this light, only the things of goodness can continue to exist there. So I like to think of, here he is, and he takes the problem, and immediately he exposes it to the light of heaven. And the light of heaven is that place of abundance, of goodness, of purity, of righteousness, of creativity and creation in all ways. When you expose disease to heaven, it becomes health. When you expose fear to heaven, it becomes great faith. When you expose poverty, it becomes abundance, or it becomes more, wealth, say. When you expose hate, it becomes love. For those other things are sort of disease germs as far as heaven is concerned, and as he is the light of the world, both visible and invisible, just sort of give it an exposure to the nature of heaven. And see and vision in your mind what must take place. Time after time, when Jesus came up to a man that was possessed with a demon of some sort, did you ever stop to think that the demons themselves recognized him before the Pharisees did, before the religious leaders of his day? They knew who he was. And time after time, when they came up to him, he would say, "Jesus, Son of Man, have you come to torment us before our time? Have you come to drive us out?" Well, you can make this climate on the inside of you, so heavenly that old Nick will feel so uncomfortable that he's just got to leave of his own accord. And that's the only way that I think that these things can happen. Whatever the entire spiritual world is, I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else does. But this much I know, that we can create a climate on the inside. We can create a climate on the inside of us that can do the job that we cannot do by willpower. In other words, I resist not evil, but overcome it with good. In other words, if you give yourself so much to goodness, if you give yourself so much to the heavenlies that you become filled with the heavenlies, there's no possibility of evil residing within you. You'll be so filled with the heavenlies that evil will just naturally have to go. And I've seen individuals become so expert in ferreting out evilness in society, in politics, in economics, in sociology, and everything else. Boy, it's the old idea, set a thief to catch a thief, you know. Just train all of their energies to ferret out evil. But they never lift one finger in the direction of goodness. And somehow or other you could know all there is to know about the machinations of evil and just not help anybody one single iota. So he said, don't waste your time, which is the stewardship that God has placed in your hands by going around, monkeying around, spying on people. He says, just get into the swim of things and give out heaven, whatever heaven is, wherever you go. Release my love, release my faith, release my wisdom, release my power, release all that I am wherever you go. Just be so completely feeding upon me and seeing the visions of my mind and the desires of my heart in such a way that you're just so lost in that, and your interior climate will change. And if there is anything then that is unheavenly within you, it will simply be so uncomfortable that it'll simply have to leave. So that's the thing. Hold it up and expose it to heaven. I'm going to have to skip a little while here.
Never mind.
Now, here was the other thing that he did. It was he took the food then and he broke it. And he gave it to his disciples, and his disciples gave it to the crowd. Well, you've got to take the thing that you most need. This is one of the great laws of life. You've got to take the thing that you most need and give it away if you expect to get more of it. And there is the gimmick in this whole thing. I remember Hudson Taylor once. When he was training to be a physician, he was an apprentice under a doctor in England. This was about somewhere in the 1840s or in the 1850s in there, and he was called up to this house out in the slums. Up in the top floor, there was this little family living with straw on the floor there, and he said there was a woman there that was sick, and there were little kids there, and it was really just a hovel. And he said he did all that he could for them in a medical way, but then he tried to pray for these people. And he says he knew that his prayers just weren't even getting up to the ceiling. And he knew why. He said these people just had absolutely nothing. They had no money, they had no food, they had nothing at all. And Hudson Taylor was he was just living on a little bit of money. Very, very little, and really all that he had this particular day was literally a few coppers only in his pocket. And that's all that stood between him and going hungry. And he would try to pray with these people, and he just dead on the inside. And he knew what he had to do. He had to take the few coppers out of his own pocket and give the thing that he most wanted. He had to give that thing away. And he didn't want to give it away, so he would try to pray over again. Just try to pray up a storm, and no storm would come up. Would be all that was in it. So he said after a long time, all he could do was to put his hand in his pocket and just give these people the little bit of money that he had. And then he said when he prayed, he said it just seemed that all heaven opened up. And I don't remember what the rest of that story was, but in somewhere or other, I believe the physician whom he was under apprentice to remembered that his wages that his natural normal wages were overdue, and I think it was that same afternoon. But whatever it was, here's the hard thing of giving away what you most want. And you say, so I'm poor and I need money, and he says, well, give money away. Plant it in life wherever you go. Like you would plant wheat or seed or anything else, and it will come back to you, some 40-fold, some 100-fold, and so on. And you say, yeah, but this is all that I got. And he says, well, you've got to give away into life because you trust me the thing that you most want. If you want love, give away love. If you want hate, give away hate. If you want peace, give away peace. And so on, give away the thing. And so here was this, they had just this little bit, and just place yourself in the disciples' shoes. They look at them and they look at the crowd and say, well, this is crazy. Well, there are just 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, what do you think would have happened if the disciples had said, well, now look, I'm going to play this thing smart. And I'm going to look at this now. If I take the little bit that he gives me and I keep it, now it's just right. After all, I've been working all day also, and I deserve something to eat. So I'm going to look after number 1 first. And when he hands me a little piece, I'm going to keep that. Well, they wouldn't have gotten any more. But that flow continued, and he kept breaking and breaking and breaking, and the breaking and the abundance only continued to come as long as they kept giving it away. And you think, well, Lord, my goodness, here I am, and I'm getting hungrier. Now, how about some for me? He said, just keep giving it away. It's like as if you were a millionaire. You don't go to the bank and just carry all of your money around with you. But when the bills come up at the end of the month, whatever they are, you make out a check for $1 or for $5 or for $6 here or for this, and you just break off a little piece at a time and give it away. Well, there's a bank of heaven, whatever the bank of heaven is, but it's superabundance in all things. And God says, look, I've got all this, and you're my son, and you can have it, but you can only have it a bit at a time. I'm not going to let you sit on a bag of money so that you'll start to depend upon the money rather than upon me. And oftentimes that's just what we do. He says, I will not fail thee nor forsake thee in any way whatsoever, in the economic sense, in the monetary sense, or in the social sense, or in the sense of education or wisdom or the development of your mind. I'll give it to you. Just don't live in fear. Trust me. When it comes time for something, you'll get it. I'll give it to you. So here was the secret of giving away. And he took the talents off a shepherd boy one day, and somehow or other, these few talents, by being given into his hands, he broke the wisdom, the physical strength of David little by little, and he started to feed situation after situation until by the time it was all over, he had fed a multitude of government and military problems and everything else out of giving into his hands something that was totally inadequate to meet the situation. Somehow God made a great king out of the few loaves and fishes of a little shepherd boy. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to feed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes either. So those are that I think is one of the things that you have to look at. That is what he did. Now, that is not the story. And you say, well, and do I just have to wait, my goodness, all of my life and just be giving out a little bit here and there? Well, his promise is that the latter years will be greater and brighter than the former years, that in some way or other he will restore the years that the locusts have eaten, that he will make all things new, which includes your past and everything else. And so the end of this story of the feeding of the 5,000 is that they, from the bits and broken pieces of fish and bread and everything, they took up 12 baskets full. And that's a pretty good return on anybody's money. 12-fold. That's his promise. That's his abundance. Shall we? Oh, no. Yes. I'll just hand it over to you now.